Don't let the fact that I've been discussing only the artistic side of creating a comic book fool you. Comic books are a largely visual medium, but an artist wouldn't have much to draw without a story. The writer's craft is equally important to a successful comic book. Remember, comics make use of elements from writing as well as the visual arts. Just as common artistic concepts are important to comic books, so are literary notions, such as metaphor, foreshadowing, hyperbole, and of course, conflict. Again, this isn't an exhaustive list by any means. The advantage the comic book writers have is that they can use these devices not only verbally, but in visual context as well. The writer has two avenues of expression. While it's true that the artist will be actually producing the art, a comic book writer has enough input to suggest certain visual compositions which will help move the story along or make a point. The common misconception is that comic books feature sequences of pictures accompanied by words that simply restate what's in the pictures. Unfortunately, sometimes this is the case, but far more frequently, the words are a complement to what is being shown in the art or vice versa. And the complete idea is given not by each element individually, but by the combination of both. Logically, if the literary form allows for an incredible range of expression, and if art can also convey an enormous amount of information and meaning, the combination of the two would provide virtually limitless possibilities, right? Well, that's what comic books are. There's one more concept unique to the comic book vocabulary that I want to discuss. It's pretty important, so pay close attention. Okay, are you ready for it? All right, I'll tell you. That's it. It's the action of turning the page. More specifically, the process of leading the reader up to a point and raising expectations for what's to come on the next page. The payoff can be just about anything. The dramatic answer to some question the story has been striving to answer, a complete shock or twist ending, or simply a change in setting. Until the page is turned, what comes next is a complete unknown. Comic books nearly always take advantage of this transition. Even when facing pages, each page can be made a cohesive unit so that if the setting were to change from one page to the next, it would cause little confusion. Changing everything around in the middle of the page, on the other hand, would likely force the reader to stop reading and go back to the previous panel to make sure he or she didn't miss anything. If this happens, the flow of the story has been broken. So it becomes important to keep any big changes or surprises visually separate from the moments leading up to them. Novels generally don't take advantage of the next page transition, although there's nothing to stop a writer from doing so. The usual case, though, is that sentences and paragraphs simply follow one another, and whenever the big payoff happens, it happens, regardless of the words positioned on the page. It's largely due to the visual nature of comics that page transitions work so well for comic books. When viewing a page full of words, all the words are equally visible but have no real context until they're read in sequence. A page of images taken in all at once can be understood to a degree at a glance. So proper pacing of visual cues is vital. Bearing all this in mind, it becomes clear that there is a significant deal of artistry involved in creating a comic book. The task must be considered from both an artistic and a literary standpoint, and assimilates some of the most important conventions of both while developing a singular work. None of what I have discussed in this chapter is limited to creating kid stuff. There is no intrinsic element of comic books that makes them a subpar art form. The fact is that early comic books appealed to young readers, but the very first ones, collections of newspaper strips, were intended for adult consumption, as newspaper strips have always been enjoyed by adults. The early stages of a burgeoning new art form should not be used to dismiss the inherent potential of the form. I'll draw this chapter to a close here, but understand that I've barely scratched the surface of all that makes comics in general, and comic books in particular, a viable art form. I haven't discussed panel-to-panel transitions, characteristics of line and color, establishing mood, or varying degrees of iconization and abstraction. Some great books, particularly those by Will Eisner and Scott McCloud, discuss all these and more at length, and to delve into these concepts in much more detail would be outside the focus of this thesis. I would strongly recommend those books to anyone wanting a deeper knowledge of the mechanics and theory behind sequential art.